Right now, China is paying a 104% tariff.
What the US is doing now is not reform. It is rejecting the very system it created.
We were losing a lot of money under Biden, trillions of dollars, trillions on trade. And now that whole tide has turned. We're making a lot of money. We're taking in a lot of money.
Hello and welcome to Technocracy. I'm Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. During his electoral campaign, President Trump repeatedly emphasized that tariff was one silver bullet for American citizens' hardships relating to unemployment, inflation. It is our declaration of economic independence, Trump said. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. In fact, so confident was the president about the efficacy of his tariff plan that he declared April 2nd to be the Liberation Day, the day when the reciprocal tariffs were to go into effect. The president and his officials gave many reasons for the plan, at times touting tariff as a way to help the US government reduce its dependence upon income tax as the main source of revenue, and sometimes as a way to reduce trade deficit with countries that were supposedly taking advantage of the US. It has been difficult to rationalize on what criteria tariffs were imposed. The plan set a 10% baseline tariff for all imports coming into the US, except for Canada and Mexico. The plan also imposed steep tariff rates on other countries, including 34% on China, 20% on the European Union, and 26% on India. The average effective US tariff rate rose from 2.5% to an estimated 27%, the highest in over a century. However, economists around the world and institutions such as IMF have warned that the escalating trade wars due to Trump's imposition of tariffs and the reciprocal measures taken by other countries may prove to be disruptive and lead both the American and the global economy into recession. And just as the tariffs went into effect, the stock market began tanking and investors lost trust in the American bonds, considered up to this moment the safest of all bonds. And so, the Trump administration announced a 90-day pause on rates exceeding 10% for most countries. However, the Trump administration increased its levies on China to 125%, with some products facing tariff up to 245%. Now, with the big tech's presence at Trump's inauguration, and then having toed the line on some of Trump's populist policies, it seemed that big techs wouldn't be at the receiving end of Trump's policies. Further, both have one common adversary, China. For big techs, China's innovative tech firms can cut into their market share, while for Trump, China is a threat against the US's economic progress and national security. So while it is difficult to rationalize how tariffs were imposed in the first place, once the tariffs were paused, officials of the Trump administration emphasized that the end game was always China, and it seemed logical enough. However, the problem is that in the aftermath of the pause of tariffs, the Trump administration announced restrictions on export of H20 chips to China, citing worries that it can be used to build a supercomputer, and NVIDIA, the California company at the heart of the revolution in artificial intelligence technology, lost billions of dollars from its market value. The US restriction also hit the MI308 processor made by rival chip company Advanced Micro Devices, and its share dropped 6.5%. In Asia, South Korean semiconductor businesses such as Samsung and SK Hynix fell by about 4%, and the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company dropped 2.5%. These chip making companies are not the only ones to lose. Trump's tariffs and the uncertainty surrounding them have reignited cost pressures and supply chain complexities. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, Google, and Facebook are dealing with trade policy disruptions, regulatory pressures, and market instability. Since Trump's inauguration, the combined value of all these companies has dropped by $4.2 trillion, reflecting growing uncertainty. The price of critical tech hardware like semiconductors, servers, and cloud infrastructure has gone up sharply. These components are usually sourced from a globally connected supply chain, and when tariff hits, it immediately raised costs across the board and slowed down IT infrastructure rollouts. Further, training large-scale models like GPTs or other generative AI systems require massive computing power and cloud storage. Since these resources are affected by higher cost and uncertain availability, progress in AI development is slowing down. AI infrastructure has also taken a hit, and Microsoft has put on hold more than $1 billion worth of new data centers projects in Ohio and other US states. Further, China has also hit back with its own tariff, this time a hefty 34% on US tech exports. And the European Union has also turned up the heat on big American tech. Using its new Digital Markets Act, the European Commission recently fined Apple 500 million euros and Meta 200 million euros for anti-competitive behavior. These fines come with stricter rules that limit how tech companies can operate within the European market. So, the early optimism of profits accruing from Trump aiding the growth of big techs has not been materialized. In fact, the losses have been far greater. Many economists have argued that Trump's tariff could prove to be a blessing in disguise for India, as it faces much lower tariffs than its neighbors, and it will also convince the government to make some long due revision in its taxation policies. However, others have pointed out reasons to be cautious. India's IT sector has the largest share of India's export surplus with the US, and it might suffer as Trump's tariffs are likely to suppress consumer demand in the US because they will make most things costlier. The enhanced role of AI in companies had already caused worry in the Indian IT sector, and tariffs might prove to be an additional shock. To further understand how Trump's tariff will impact the digital economy and the world of technology, today we are joined by Professor Susan Ariel Aaronson. Professor Aaronson is Research Professor of International Affairs at George Washington University and also the co-principal investigator with the National Institute of Standards and Technology Institute for Trustworthy AI in Law and Society, TRAILS, where she leads research on data and governance. Professor Aaronson is also the director of Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub at George Washington University. I want to ask you, what is the rationale behind President Trump's tariff on all countries, friends and foes alike?
There is no rationale. It's terrible. There's no logic. And if he really wants better trade agreements, there's an organization called the WTO. And right now, even the WTO is proceeding plurilaterally, right, with negotiations on e-commerce. Why not use the organization that exists? Now, it's true, the tariffs that he has put on violate WTO rules because the tariffs are bound, which means that, you know, they're not supposed to go any higher. They're bound. They're legally divined, if you will. And Trump loves to disrupt existing institutions, but the American response to his tariffs and his mismanagement, you know, he is underwater in terms of popularity. So he's going to have to change course, and they don't know how to do that because they're such uneducated, inexperienced at policy. But I am hopeful because I'm an idiot and I'm always hopeful. And sometimes out of mistakes, you can create something better. That said, I think he is the worst president the United States has ever had. And, you know, unfortunately, this is what we have to deal with. He is not interested in democracy. He has no respect for ideas. He doesn't read. And, you know, he is undermining America's brand and competitive advantage, but that's not what you asked me about.
The logic
But
that
it's terrifying.
the logic that has been given to us is that the tariffs are to reduce the trade deficit that the US has with other countries.
No, there's been like 6 different reasons, right? To raise money so we can lower income taxes, to punish nations that don't treat us fairly. This is ridiculous. Excuse me, define fairness. Does he understand how economies work? There is something called, you know, comparative advantage. We sell to the movies. India sells movies around the world. India sells software and expertise. The United States sells soybeans and cardboard boxes and software. You know, I mean, and jet airplanes. Get your act together, understand economics. I mean, his Treasury Secretary is also a joke. And it's unfortunate. He picked people who funded him, who are loyal to him, not people who are competent. And unfortunately, the Republicans in Congress are so afraid of him that they don't speak up. And so there is no counterweight as envisioned in the Constitution. He's also one of the most corrupt presidents the United States has ever had. And that's unfortunate. So in trade policy, the way that manifests is there's no accountability. You know, firm CEOs call him up and ask for exceptions to the tariffs, and he grants those. But if you're from a small firm, then the other part of it that is very relevant to technology policy is America's comparative advantage is we're not great at primary education, but we're pretty good at college and graduate education. And people want to come here and study. I don't know if you've been to the United States, but you know, if you go to Stanford University or University of Michigan, these campuses are amazing. They're wonderful places to live and to study and to learn from people from all around the world. And that receptiveness is what has been made America great. And meanwhile, Trump is arresting students because they have different views than he likes to hear on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. This cannot endure because it's antithetical to our values and our Constitution. But the Republicans do nothing about it. We need those people because if you believe that there is, and we can talk about this because I don't, but I think AI is a public good. And that we should work with other nations to create AI in the public interest, because if we do create good AI, we may be able to transcend what we call wicked problems, like pandemics that go across borders and generations.
What has also been surprising that we saw all these large tech corporates the heads of the large tech corporates at Trump's inauguration. And as you mentioned,
I wouldn't take that very seriously. I think all of them are very dismayed with him. But, maybe they don't read correctly. But he made it very clear that he was going to put on tariffs. No one thought it would be this high and this crazy. Like the average tariff in the world is what, like 2%? And, the max tariff is like 10%. except for, really weird sectors like sugar, to put a tariff of 154% or, even 50% on our trade partners, this man is insane. He didn't seem to really understand how that would affect prices, productivity, supply lines, and trust. And that no one had the nerve to tell him. I don't know. He really is, King George, the Mad King. And nobody is brave enough to confront him. But as public opinion sours, he's either going to change course or he's going to lose his job. And I think he will lose his job.
We also understand that the tariffs are going to cause supply chain disruption, and it would lead to increased cost for production for tech giants like Tesla itself, and they are rightly dismayed with his policies. What are the other ways in which do you think these tariffs could hurt innovation and accessibility? One of the ways is obviously things are going to get more expensive to manufacture. They're going to limit that.
Well, I mean, he's already reducing the tariffs. The thing is, he doesn't have trade agreements, so they are not official. But he's already made it clear that they know they made a mistake. And every day they're fielding calls from the CEOs of Target and Walmart and IBM and, US major companies, in particular drug companies. And this is one that I think concerns India greatly, since India is among maybe the world's largest producer of pharmaceuticals, or number 2, I don't know. Thanks for correcting me. But, like this kind of instability makes it impossible to have an adequate supply of drugs. And we need that for many reasons. Drugs are extremely expensive in the United States compared to other countries because we don't have the right to health the way you do in India, and we don't have a modern constitution. So there is no public funding of healthcare except unless you're elderly or very, very poor. And people can't afford their medication. And when they can't afford food or their medication, they will scream and riot. So Trump is setting the scenes for his own. They just did not game this out. Like you and I might say, what could possibly be the spillover effects in a week, in 2 months, in 4 months?
I read your article preparing for this interview, and you talk about that, the tech companies and Trump did have one common enemy, China, and brought them together. But as an
I don't talk like that. China's not our enemy. India's not our
President
enemy.
Trump's enemy as a threat to national.
It's not an enemy. I mean, he loves dictators, so he admires Xi, and he doesn't see Xi as his enemy. I mean, he sees Xi as America's main competitor, and he understands that Xi has powers that he will never have. And so there's some jealousy, but it's not enemy. That's the wrong characterization.
You do talk about the divisions among tech corporates, and what kind of divisions do you foresee as?
Well, they're all very different, right? Google doesn't own a social network. Google makes its money from advertising, right? How Google deals with your data and sells your data is very different from Meta. Moreover, Google's approach to AI starts off open source, now is a bit more proprietary, possibly because of the lawsuits. Meta's approach, they say they're open source, but they're not really. No one is fully transparent about their model weights. And so I would say that's a real problem, and that's something I really want to work on. I just haven't figured out a methodology. But how do you incentivize greater transparency? I just don't know how to do that. But it seems to me that each of them have different positions on this, right? Google creates phones, so does Apple. So their goods are subject to tariffs. Every one of these needs semiconductors in order to create their AI. now they've seen a new model that seems to use less energy. So their whole thesis for US government intervention is under question. Then there's, of course, the national security competition. So not enemy, competitor. And having a competitor is really good if you believe in capitalism, right? You want someone breathing down your neck so that you look for ways to be more productive, more creative.
China has certainly performed better, or like has found ways to evade the export control measures that were imposed on it, and has come out with a better model, cheaper model. I mean, so China with somebody breathing down its neck
It's not a
has,
better model. It's a
yes,
good enough model, right? It's not a better model. It's not ever been #1 on the leaderboards, if that's how you define a better model. It's also a censored model, so it's going to hallucinate more by definition. But it's a good enough model, and that's impressive.
My last question to you is that on one hand, we have economists who are trying to rationalize Trump's trade policies, urging countries like India to make the best use of the opportunity. We are going ahead with finalizing the terms of reference for the upcoming trade agreement that we would have with US, and there are people who are on the optimistic side, right? But then there are people like yourself who see no rationale whatsoever to these tariff plans. What would be your advice to a country like India, who is very much dependent on the US for its export and does gain from trading with US? I mean, how do we go about this chaotic world and this?
Yeah, I think everybody sees India as the counterweight to China because of its economies of scale and scope and, fabulous engineering expertise, right? Trump it has this, he's horrible. He's 87% horrible, but there's this 13% that his disruption creates possibilities. In the United States, it's absolutely terrible because so many people are unemployed now. So many people, companies are cutting back, and young people see no future, which is why Trumpism, in my mind, is dead. He showed what it looks like, and no one likes it. Even the people who voted for him don't like it. So, but for India, I don't know. I don't know enough about it to say, but I do see the United States and India moving closer.
President Trump was elected, we had a whole event, and the former ambassador to the US, your foreign relation expert, journalists, they all said that the neoliberal world as we know it is like falling. It's with President Trump's election, now it wouldn't survive anymore. And we already see that in terms of monetary institution, like dollar has lost its value for the first time, and people are losing the trust in dollar bonds of the American currency. Your trade relations and trade treaties fluctuating. You never know what is going to happen in the economy from one day to another. Do you think the cooperation or the sort of the acceptance that we had of the world as we need to work together globally, people need to sit on the table, decide on treaties, adhere by them, there are laws, there's no jungle, right? There are laws by which countries need to play, even though we all know that at times people employ all kind of tools, but there was this overarching system of law that is now going into decline. Would you agree with this description?
No. I disagree with it. I think what Trump has shown is it's reinventing those institutions. I mean, it was time we reinvented them anyway. Like, data is an asset. Only China has recognized data as an asset. What we think of as assets, what we think of as money is changing, right? That's thing one. But Trump, the response to Trump has been a reestablishment of democracy. For example, in Canada, instead of the radical, Trump-like leader, he is going to lose next week, right? In Europe, there's new alliances of democracies. And I think, that is in response to Trump. And in the United States, like, it's very depressing. I'm very worried about American democracy. Trump is testing everything, and it's terrifying. Like, there is censorship, there is a total violations of the Constitution. But in that overreaction, you will get people working harder. And I think we'll end up, like, we should talk again in 2 years in November 2026. I think you'll get a Democratic Congress. I hope I'm right, and I don't know, I can't predict the future, that takes norms and puts them into law. We're going to have to do that. That is the lesson of Trump. And we need new approaches. Like when you and I started this conversation, we were talking about how do you talk with your citizens in the 21st century so that you have democratic governance of tech. And, this is the amazing thing. Like, you would think, like, I work with a AI company that just got bought that tries to find consensus it's called Consensus AI, but on public policies. And various agencies use it to try to move forward. That's the kind of thing I think, while I don't particularly like how that one works, I do think you're going to see technology used to facilitate democracy. I haven't seen good examples of it yet. Citizen science is, I think, very useful way to build. The problem is you got to be educated to, well, maybe not. But, I just, whatever you think of crowdsourcing, but you have to first educate people so they can make informed decisions. And that's the hard part. And that's where I don't know what to say. But I've got to be optimistic because I'm very Pollyanna-ish.
Thank you so
Me
much.
too.